Now today we get an insight into a group called Overeaters Anonymous. It's a group actually that I hadn't heard of. It's a fellowship of individuals who through shared experience, strength and hope are recovering from compulsive overeating. And I guess I didn't quite understand that compulsive overeating, we're talking about people who are addicted to food. So today, Take It From Us examines the link too between overeating and mental health and how some mental health medications contribute to weight gain and overeating. So in the studio are John and Anna. Their surnames are deliberately withheld, and they are members of Overeaters Anonymous in Auckland. So welcome to you.
So Overeaters Anonymous grew out of Alcoholics Anonymous, actually. It started in 1960 in California. And has grown to the point where now we've got around 7,000 meetings in 80 countries of the world, and there's about 54,000 members.
Is that per week, Anna? 7,000 meetings each week?
Yes, right. That's on a weekly basis. So it's helping a lot of people.
Right.
And OA is an organisation that helps people who suffer from compulsive eating. Compulsive overeating means people who are regularly doing things with food that they don't want to be doing, people who feel out of control with food, and people doing things that they've promised themselves they won't do with food.
So is it very similar to an alcohol addiction?
We see it as an addiction to food, and technically it's called a behavioural addiction because food is not technically an addictive substance.
Although there would be some suspicions that food manufacturers are putting substances into the food which could make them addictive.
That's interesting, and I have heard that too. Certainly, as a compulsive overeater, when I ate food, I felt like I couldn't stop. But with those other organisations, we don't, as an organisation, have an opinion on what they're doing, and I'm not sure what they're doing, but certainly it felt addictive to me.
But sugar, perhaps, is one of those substances that could make food addictive. Is that right or not?
For a normal member of the population, I don't know. But for a compulsive overeater like me, I found sugar. I class it personally as a drug rather than a food. It feels like a drug in my system, and it acts in my system the same way as a drug. And so I don't eat sugar at all. I can't eat it moderately.
Right, yeah. Well, John, we'll bring you in here. You're no stranger to radio, John.
That's right.
So you had some involvement with Take It From Us, going back a little way?
Yeah, right back to the start, actually before Take It From Us, with in 1987 with Access Radio in Auckland.
That was when they were based at the Auckland Institute of Technology?
Yes, and before that at the Pacific Island Resource Centre up in Jervois Road.
Right, and were you involved there when it was talking about mental health? Or?
Yes.
Right. Oh, well, you're one of the pioneers going right back. But John helped us celebrate the 20th year of Take It From Us as well. So I'd overlooked the fact that you were sort of one of the pioneers going back to the Pacific Island Resource Centre. I remember I was on the Auckland Star and used to, in fact, reported the establishment of the Pacific Island Resource Centre, and at that stage that was probably in the early 70s. It was seen as a tremendous resource right in the heart of Ponsonby, I think, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So, John, what would you like to say about Overeaters Anonymous? I mean, how long have you been associated with it?
I started my membership early in 1991. I haven't been a continuous member. I had a gap in the middle of about 8 years where I didn't make a commitment to my recovery, and during that time I got up to my highest weight of 122 kilos, and that was basically because I wasn't prepared to put the work into it, or I didn't feel I had the time.
So, did you fall into this category of being a food addict?
Oh, definitely.
And, I mean, is that something that has to be diagnosed? A GP has to diagnose it in order for you to be able to address that addiction?
No, it's really up to us as individuals to make that decision. And, like, my current GP doesn't seem to relate to it like that at all. He's a great doctor, but he doesn't really take any interest in Overeaters Anonymous.
So is he in a degree of denial that food addiction is real?
No, he actually has helped me. He's recommended certain foods and a book that helped me develop a food plan, because he realised that I was being attracted to food and developing cravings, which is, for me, is part of the addiction, is having cravings.
So what sort of foods would you crave?
Sugary foods and chocolate, and fatty and crisp foods.
Crisps?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, is it just the taste, or is it you go into a food outlet, a cafe, and you see food, and it's the
when
appeal?
I'm in a vulnerable condition, stressed, and not following the recommendations of the program, I can be in that state of where I'm craving, and that's what we call white knuckling it, when we're fighting the urge to pick up that packet in the supermarket.
Right.
But when we're spiritually fit, is a term we use, I can walk past those foods and not feel a draw to them.
Right. So you've mentioned the phrase spiritually fit. Does that relate, Anna, to the 12-step program, which I guess is famous in Alcoholics Anonymous? Tell us a little bit about that program.
Sure. Yes, the 12 steps of Overeaters Anonymous are exactly the same as the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. They only change that one word from alcoholic to compulsive overeater.
Right.
And the 12 steps are a spiritual program of recovery. And that was something that scared me before I came to OA, because I was frightened that maybe I was, going to be joining a religious cult, or, was going to be forced to take on some beliefs that didn't feel right for me. And when I went to OA, I was so relieved, because there they explained to me that it isn't a religious organisation. It's not affiliated with any other religious or spiritual organisations.
Is that a perception, though, about these Overeaters Anonymous or Alcoholics Anonymous, that sort of thing? Is it a perception that there is some sort of religious cult behind it? Because they do talk about honouring a higher power, don't they?
Sure, they do. And I remember when I first joined, there was an old guy who'd been around for many, many years, and he was so lovely. He really helped me understand it. He looked me right in the eye and he said, "Anna, I don't care if your higher power is a door handle. The point is, it has to be something outside your head, because your best thinking got you here."
Right. So are you prepared to say what your higher power is in terms of your food addiction?
Sure. My first way of defining my higher power was, somebody said to me, "Why don't you write down on a page everything that you would like your higher power to be, and don't put anything in there that you feel should be there out of obligation. Just put the things that you would trust in a higher power." And so I did, and I took it to the person, and they said, great, there's your higher power.
Right.
And so over my time in Overeaters Anonymous, and I've been in recovery for 13 years, back-to-back recovery, my higher power's developed into a God of love. And my higher power is a guiding, loving, all-knowing spiritual force in my life that I look to.
Right. And John, your higher power, you happy to reveal what that is for you?
Yeah, Sheldon, for me, I was brought up in a very strongly atheistic family. My father was a scientist. My mother would say to me, it's up to you to decide for yourself whether you believe in God or not. And in my 20s, I did some spiritual searching. And this was before I joined OA when I was about 31, 32. And I ended up joining a religion about 2 years before I found OA. But what I found was the difference after I became a member of OA is that my relationship with my higher power got stronger. And it got more intimate and more helpful. Because we talk about some people having a tiny God syndrome, where they don't feel that God is big enough or strong enough or is interested enough in their food addiction to be able to help them. So to me it was like putting a magnifying glass under my existing higher power and making it concentrate on me,
right,
and help me with my addiction.
You said before you joined OA that you had joined some sort of spiritual organisation. Was that a deliberate strategy to try and get help for your food addiction?
No, it was just independent spiritual search.
Right. So today we are talking about food addiction with John and Anna and they are both members of Overeaters Anonymous. Anna, your personal challenge with food addiction, when did that first start?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that I always had a relationship that wasn't normal with food. Even when I was a small girl, I came from a dysfunctional family, and there was a lot of unhappiness. And I can remember as a small girl going down the bank at the side of our house and eating the bread that had been thrown out for the birds. And what it did, I didn't like the taste of it particularly, but that full feeling in my stomach numbed out the unpleasant emotions. And so as I got older, that just strengthened really, and I became the person that went back for seconds, and the person that, the child hanging around the food table at a party, and then when I got older and started to be able to buy my own junk food, that's when I connected that if I ate like that, I would put on weight. And so I put on about 10 kilos. It wasn't a lot of weight. I've never been overweight. But I got a big fright because I put that 10 kilos on really fast as a teenager during my first part-time job in the holidays. And that weight gain and the fright from it sent my eating disorder in another direction. I was so desperate not to gain weight that it started this kind of seesawing pattern where I would have a binge on a large amount of food, so it had gone from something that I could do in front of other people, just big helpings, going back for seconds, that stuff, to something that I had to do on my own. Right. So I would buy large amounts of food, a lot, and it was the sugar, the fat, the salt, and then I would eat it, but I was never physically able to vomit. I tried, but I couldn't, and so instead I used to starve for several days at a time to sort of nullify the effects on my weight. And what happened was I lost weight, and I spent most of my 20s in the low 40s kilos, and without a menstruation cycle, because if you drop below a certain weight, your body partially shuts down. So I was very sick, but I thought it was fantastic because finally I could give in to that huge desire to eat a large amount of food. I just wanted to eat as much as possible. That was my craving for food, and it was connected to numbing out my emotions. But I didn't have to gain weight, so I thought it was great. But what I wasn't looking at was my emotional life, my mental life, my spiritual life, how unhappy I was. Terribly, terribly unhappy.
So what is the link between that unhappiness and your, what sounds like a somewhat disordered relationship with food? There's a close link.
Sure, absolutely. For me, there was eating that way, I believe, is a form of self-abuse. It's very abusive, and I couldn't do that, treat myself that abusively and feel good about myself.
So you didn't feel that you deserved to feel good about yourself? Is that...
Well, for me personally, I as I said, I grew up in a dysfunctional family, and what I mean by that was that there was a lot of active addictions in my family, and not good life skills and not good parenting skills, although my parents were doing their best. And so I grew up already, before I even sort of got my own addiction with food got going, I was already suffering from low self-esteem and didn't value myself, and so addiction was my way to cope. Food addiction was my way to cope with feeling like that. But food addiction generates its own unhappiness as well. And so I had two layers. I had the pre-existing unhappiness and the shame that goes with having a food addiction, the remorse with each binge, the guilt, the fear, what was going to happen to me. And it's really scary being caught in a sort of a whirlpool of increasing craving.
Well, we talk in mental health about that downward spiral,
right,
which is often very difficult to interrupt, and once we start to drop, and perhaps, John, you have had that experience yourself with that downward spiral. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that's right. For me, my overeating began in a way when I was a child and a teenager, and that I really loved food, and my mother was very generous in teaching the boys in the family how to cook, so I learned to bake and make confectionery. But I didn't put on weight until my late teens, after I'd had a mental breakdown when I was a medical student at Otago. And after that, I was very depressed when I came out of hospital. I was in hospital for about 3 months, and I was on an antipsychotic injection, and I rapidly put on weight. I was lethargic, I was depressed, and I put on weight.
And what did you attribute that weight gain to?
Well, at the time I thought it was just a medication, really.
But have you got some other insights around that now, or do you think it was totally the medication at the time?
I think recovery from psychotic illness is difficult. I'm now on a medication called olanzapine, which is an antipsychotic. It's one of the 3 meds that I'm on. And when I first went on it, my wife at the time said I became an eating machine. My cravings were just so intense, particularly for carbs. And the weight just piled on me. I didn't know how to stop it. So I wasn't in Auckland at the time, so I started attending some online meetings of OA, and that put a little bit of a brake on it. But I remember going to see the psychiatrist after I'd been to see my GP, and with both doctors I begged them to find an alternative to the olanzapine. And they said, no, you're doing so well mentally and emotionally on olanzapine, we're not prepared to take you off it. And I wasn't prepared to take myself off it, because I know so many people who have managed their own medication and become very ill again quickly. So I didn't. And when that marriage ended and I was able to come back to Auckland 3 years ago, I knew that I could go to face-to-face meetings, which for me are more powerful than the online meetings. And I was able to start putting the brakes on that weight loss.
But I mean, how do we sort of retain our emotional and mental health when we're piling on weight and we're not happy with our bodily image? I mean, it's almost a nonsense, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a dilemma. When I was first put on olanzapine, the company that made the brand we were on ran a educational group at the mental health service here on the shore. But I didn't find that effective at all, not compared to Overeaters Anonymous.
But what did they tell you? Did they try and tell you that olanzapine wasn't causing weight gain?
No, they'd encourage you to get exercise and things like that.
But, you've just said, well, the drug or your mood caused you to be lethargic. I mean, how when we're on high dosages of a medication that causes us to be lethargic and put on weight, how are we going to get out and play our tennis or run or walk or cycle or whatever? I mean, it's almost, as you say, it's worse than a dilemma, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I have heard of people that were able to get out and exercise more. I wasn't one of those people. Exercise has been difficult. But now I'm doing volunteer work 3 days a week in the city. And as part of that, I walk for 5 kilometres to the bus.
Right.
Every day I work. So I'm building exercise into my life. But I've found that exercise in itself is only a small part of maintaining weight loss. For me, it's the food that's the most critical thing.